Hello, everybody. Good day to you. My name is Volker Friedrich. I'm the founding partner and managing director of GBP International. We are a consulting firm working in and with Asia Pacific. And today I have the pleasure to have a one-on-one interview with Tan Sri Munir from Malaysia. He is one of the most reputable academic and business person I know. He has a number of assignments in various advisory boards. He is the chairman of a think tank called CARI. He has been working in many industries from aviation to telecom to banking. And Tan Sri Munir, thank you very much for having this interview with us. First of all, I'd like to ask you, how is the present scenario in the corona situation in Southeast Asia, and what is your personal impact you are seeing in the country?
Thank you, Volker, for the introduction. I think coronavirus is still with us, but I think in general, Southeast Asia has managed the pandemic better than almost every other region in the world. I mean, of course, there are exceptions like Taiwan on its own. Taiwan is fantastic the way it has managed it. And of course, China, you know, the way the virus may or may not have started there. You've got to be careful, you know, but it has got it under control. Vietnam, in Southeast Asia, Vietnam has been the best in so far as the virus pandemic is concerned. Malaysia has had its ups and downs. At the moment, we are into the third wave. We're trying actually to get the infectivity rate below 1. It is still about between 1.1 to 1.5, but you know, it is under control.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. I mean, there is no doubt that this is having a huge impact on all parts of life of individuals, families, companies, organizations, all the governments anywhere in the world. They're trying to manage with huge funding and subsidies and loans and credits and deferred payment. So it's definitely a real challenge. But today I would like to go away a little bit because we talk about Corona every day in the news. We have had a major decision with the regional comprehensive economic partnership agreement signed 2-3 weeks back. And I would like to say that in Europe and Germany, it was really underrepresented in the news and in the media, because it's the largest trade bloc now, larger than the EU, larger than US, Canada, Mexico. But what is your take on this agreement, and what role will it play in the future?
Well, in the private sector here, and you know, I represent the ASEAN private sector in various capacities. One as the chairman of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council of Malaysia, and there are 10 such councils, and we form a regional council, and we drive, you know, some of the inputs. And secondly, as chairman of CHARI, which is the ASEAN Research and Advocacy Institute, you know, and CHARI was the thought leader, the knowledge partner in a paper we presented to the leaders. It is called A Pathway Towards Recovery and Hope for ASEAN. I call it Pathway 225. There are 225 actionable steps that we call upon the ASEAN leaders to take. These are business driven. There's a widest ranging consultation that took place that was anchored by CHARI, and we got inputs from all around the world through the EU ASEAN Business Council, the US ASEAN Business Council, Australia, UK, Canada, you know, you name it, everyone had an input and an idea. And one of the things that we highlighted there was that the RCEP must be signed this year. Of course, it has happened. It has been signed. It was signed on the 15th of November. It is, of course, not ratified yet. Okay, to be ratified and in force, it will be in force 60 days after 6 ASEAN countries have ratified it, and 3 of the 5 non-ASEAN countries have ratified it. Of course, it'll take a bit of time yet, signing it, of course, the first step. Next, of course, is bringing it into effect. And then, of course, thirdly, then you will see how it comes into effect, in terms of reality. It is a very good agreement. Obviously, there were so many different countries involved. I think the Indonesian negotiator on behalf of ASEAN put it best at the end of it. He said, simultaneous start. Okay, everyone's starting, but differentiated timetables. So because if you look at the annexures, for the various countries in terms of the tariffs and so on, you find, of course, time being given to some other countries. For Malaysia, for example, is 000. So overall, it's about 92% decrease in tariffs, amongst the participating members. Right. That's quite important for trade, And then, of course, it will also simplify and standardize customs procedures, between the participating states. It will also simplify, very important, this one, the rules of origin. And the certificate of origin that you present at any one point will be sufficient if it is produced, the product is produced in RCEP country for the final destination market. In terms of the supply chain, that has been such an important topic during the COVID crisis. This is quite important and will encourage, therefore, greater investment along the supply chain in countries that can value add in that supply chain process. And I think that is a very important thing in making this region you mentioned, which has eclipsed the EU as the largest trading bloc in the world. It's got,
interrupting you here. And I think it's a very ambitious and very wonderful target and vision and mission which has been signed. And I think also in some activity we have been monitoring the development of ASEAN together. And there have been shortcomings in ASEAN. We have had a number of events where we have been discussing EU-ASEAN cooperation. Can't we say that this is even more complex because we have even more partners to bring under one umbrella than 10 ASEAN countries? And this RCEP.
No, I think
realistic.
I think EU-ASEAN remains EU-ASEAN, but the problem is the EU-ASEAN FTA has taken a very long time, to be negotiated. Yeah. And that's problem number one. Problem number two, EU seems to be quite satisfied so far because it's got 2 FTAs, with ASEAN member countries, Singapore and Vietnam, and Vietnam. So, but I think this is a time for the EU and the ASEAN to move together to have an FTA. And this will give EU an opportunity as well in RCEP, quite apart from ASEAN, ASEAN market.
I agree with your assessment, but honestly speaking, I'm not very optimistic, that the EU has this on top of their agenda, given present circumstances. So I really welcome you to be more present in Brussels, in Berlin, in London, to push this agenda.
But then you look at the overall, if you look at RCEP overall, there are certain provisions in the agreement. There are 20 chapters, as you know, in the RCEP agreement. And therefore, even if you do not have an FTA, you can invest in one of the RCEP countries, like say an ASEAN country, to therefore reach a destination market in RCEP, which is a market which is 1/3 of global output, which is big and it is growing faster. ASEAN itself, has grown, I think in the past decade at 5.3%. And this year will be the first time, I think in 22 years, that ASEAN will have a negative growth of minus 3.8 because of COVID.
Yes.
And also investments have fallen, in 2020. In ASEAN, for example, overall it's fallen about 14%.
Right.
Although that is not the same everywhere. Indonesia is only 6% decrease.
That's right.
But average has fallen. But then it will come back. It will come back, and then I think it will be well placed. And RCEP, your initial question, RCEP will make it better place, to expand the economy again. Now,
definitely, it's a very good platform.
But on the EU, it's not just trade. It's not just investment. It's about quality, sustainable development goals, green technologies that you can bring, standards of transparency, of accountability that they can introduce into projects and make it a habitual thing, in ASEAN, in the region at large. So EU has got a very important role to play, both on the hard and the soft, side, of economic growth, of economic, integration, or of economic cooperation. Right. So EU has got a role to play. It must grab it.
Yeah, I can't agree more with you. And when we see the overall picture, how the EU is positioning itself and their companies, that they put the bar very high, when it comes to ethical investments. You mentioned the United Nations Global Development Goals, sustainability issues. I'd like to draw the discussion a little bit towards the role of China in the RCEP, as well as in the overall global, let's say, trade discussion with EU, US-China conflict, transition of power in the US in January. Where and how do you see China playing along? The negative view here is that China has a very nice tool now with RCEP to dominate 1/3 of the world population as a key player in the RCEP community, and that EU, US kind of put on the sidelines. What's your view on that one?
Yeah, you are, quite right. Everyone worries about China, is bothered about China's dominance. Now that is undoubtedly there is obvious Chinese dominance in the region. Now the question is whether there'll be Chinese domination of the region. The difference, and that domination means across all sectors, across all thoughts, across all fields, and therefore, while they may have dominance, in terms of trade, in terms of investment, perhaps infrastructure development, and so on, they should not have the dominate the region. And the only way they cannot dominate the region is if other states, other regions come into this region. That's point number one. So others, it's not a game of power politics. It's a game of presence, of involvement and presence. Why should not other parts of the world come and get involved? Right? It's not an exclusive arrangement. Secondly, I think the second point is actually people forget that RCEP is an ASEAN idea. It's an ASEAN initiative. And it was intended to ensure that there was ASEAN centrality in economic growth and regionalization. Now, ASEAN, after having achieved this signing, must take ownership of RCEP. It cannot sort of allow RCEP to be dominated by 1, 2, or 3 countries. ASEAN must therefore show its mettle and be able to act as one, which has always been a weakness of ASEAN. And people say, ASEAN is not able to decide. The other member countries of RCEP are single countries, nation states, who can decide very fast, who are very focused. And maybe China is very, very focused, right? And therefore, they say, well, ASEAN is going to be divided, it's going to be splintered. And therefore, different states will take different status. And if ASEAN allows that to happen, it could mean the splintering of ASEAN. And therefore, something that ASEAN started should not result in its splintering. It should stay the course, follow it. At the same time, if there are outside parties also involved with ASEAN, it will help, sort of gel, the ASEAN togetherness. And therefore, ASEAN must take ownership and not give up leadership of RCEP.
Well, that's all fine and well said, let's say, in brackets, in theory. In practical terms, we also have some observations here in the EU, which is always trying to negotiate in a unified form. And we have some observers who say, look, China buying harbors in Greece or in Italy, they are starting to split the union. And do you see the risk that China will make bilateral agreements, let's say with Indonesia or with Malaysia, where they give them certain benefits and they ask them in return not to be so strong in the RCEP negotiation?
I think, I'll take up 2 points from what you just said. One, I have been very critical of ASEAN leadership, of ASEAN decision-making process. I have been hitting out very hard in newspaper articles, at meetings, with ASEAN officials, with ASEAN leaders, and so on. So I think they have to up their game in terms of leadership and decision-making. If they don't, they're going to be, hit for six. Okay? And therefore, that's point number one. Point number two, therefore, will ASEAN do it? Will ASEAN not do it? Let's see. Let's see how it goes. Now, but if point number two, if you have engagement by third countries, by third regions, you also inject a different kind of dynamic in the development process. I'll give you an example. BRI, seen as a China, storming and stomping all over the world, trying to take over.
You're talking about unsustainable. BRI's Belt and Road Initiative, for our listeners, right?
But what you have to do is you've got to inject the qualities of sustainable growth and the qualities of transparency, accounting standards, accountability into projects, including BRI projects. That can only come about if you say, okay, you have project A, therefore, that involves European engineers, let's say, or European lawyers as well, and so on and so forth. Europe must stay involved in the region and must be even more involved to avoid this domination that you are afraid of. If you're afraid of domination, but you do not do anything about it, where are you going to be?
That's exactly the point, The problem from a business perspective is, or from the project owner's perspective is that if you have all these higher standards, higher transparency, higher compliance, etc., from a business perspective, it is adding costs to the project investment. So who's going to pick up the bill for these higher standards?
Well, those are costs well borne, because if you look at green projects and investment in green industries, green companies, the rate of return actually is better than, there is evidence to show, by investment bankers have this evidence to show. Okay, if you are going to be driven purely by the rate of return, and therefore you go green. It gives you a higher return, right? Even if you're not, if you're not convinced on SDG goals and so on.
No, I agree with you. And if you look at the financial community, and you're a banker as well, there are a lot of, especially state investment funds from Norway, for example, who make a very clear cut now, for instance, not to invest in fossil fuel energy projects anymore and things like, and they take care of CO2 emission calculation and things like that. So we are definitely on the right track, but it will take time. It hasn't been rolled out completely on a global base. I agree with this.
I think, if ASEAN does not learn from the mistakes that have been made in the UK, in the US, even in Europe, in terms of development, without care for people, the quality of life of people, and the differences in incomes and wealth among people, it's going to end up in the same way with polarized societies. That's going to attack the political stability which ASEAN always talks about. Therefore, to nurture that political stability, you must understand that the dynamics of your economic development must not be one that topples that stability. Must be one that actually gives privileges. You know, we talk about sustainable development goals, and nobody knows what it is for low down there. You know, they don't know what it is. We talk about digitalization. I mean, they say, okay, I use my mobile phone. That's about the length of it, insofar as digitalization is concerned. However, if you're able to provide public health satisfaction by using the digital platform, you are satisfying the individual need, sustainable development goal, healthy population to sustain the economy, and the digitalization process. That's why in our Pathway 225 proposals, we're very clear to see the interlinkages between the different goals and making sure they're interlinked, and that people can do business. You know, you can make investments in ag tech, healthcare, and those are the two main growing areas, of course, as a result of COVID.
And in that respect, we also have to give credit to China now, who is the largest investor now in solar parks, in renewable energy. They have also made a statement where they are committing to make the Chinese industry more CO2 neutral. So they are investing heavily in this. There's no alternative on a global scale anyway, if you believe the facts and if you listen to the scientists.
But even as you talk about development, use of new technologies and new chips, artificial intelligence, every darn thing under the digitalization process, even as a result of it, there are certain other needs. Cybersecurity, investment in cybersecurity is so critical. I read a forecast that by 2021, next year, any new organization will fall victim to ransomware. Every 11 seconds in the world, every 11 seconds, costing businesses, it is predicted up to $20 billion a year.
Yeah, it's a huge industry, and definitely.
Therefore, you know, you've got cybersecurity software, you've got cybersecurity, sort of offerings. I mean, it's also very, very much part and process of this whole continuum of all that's being done in the name of digitalization.
Yeah. One aspect I'd like to touch on is as a result of the China-US trade conflict, we have seen quite a lot of benefits from investors taking their investment out of China, and they invested in Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia. Do you see this continuing as we are entering this transition in the US government, or is this just a little glitch in the infra or inner ASEAN or inner Asian investment distribution, I could say?
Well, as you know, Volker, the investment out of China, relocation out of China took place even before the US-China trade war, primarily for cost reasons, because cost of production in China was rising. Of course, it was accelerated by the US-China trade war, and now accelerated even further by the COVID-19 consequences of people looking at supply lines, looking at disruption in supply chain, people wanting to nearshore, and have strategic protectionism, as is talked about in Europe, for example. Yet, what we're going to have now, as you say, as a result of RCEP, and with the result of the certificate of origin, being a facilitative factor in allowing movement of goods and even some services, in the RCEP chapter, I think, if I remember correctly, chapter 8. So all these things will actually result in the region, yes, being on the supply chain. Relocations will take place at places which are cheapest, but also which have the human capital to add value from that
that's
relocation.
in all my experience, that is a key decision-making factor for any investor. You know, you have not only cheap labor or cheap resources, but also quality resources. It's still the bottleneck for many investments, not only in Asia but anywhere in the world. Okay, Tan Sri, I'd like to go a little bit more practical, pragmatic, because you're also a very savvy and successful businessman. If you put yourself into the shoes of, let's say, a European mid-sized, let's say, machinery company, is this the right time to look more closer to an investment into the ASEAN region now, or is it a little bit tricky now and blur because of all these changes going on, of the COVID situation, of China-US relationship? What is the strategic scenario from your point of view?
I think it's absolutely the right time, because, you know, the ground has been, as it was, zeroed out, hollowed out. At the same time, the digitalization products, you know, have been discovered as which are the ones that are most needed and most need to be delivered. And so, you know, in the case of education, you know, ed tech, there's huge opportunities, because, you know, 90% of the world's classrooms closed down, you know, during this thing. That's what ed tech has grown. Therefore, the quality of the product that you offer, you know, like your recording here, the quality of the recording that you offer will be the determinant of whether people buy your product or not. So ed tech is very important, and therefore you have people who have to think of YouTube productions or recordings that they can sell that fulfill needs of education, language needs, and so on. So ed tech will certainly grow. And secondly, I think health, you know, health tech. I mean, there are things like still, despite the vaccine, there is still need for mass testing. You know, you need that device. You need that device for mass testing. Whether the device can be a mass test, a test that gives you spontaneous result, or whether you have COVID-19 or not, and one which gives you a result 1 week later, that makes a difference in terms of whether you're able to travel freely and so on and so forth. And of course, these sorts of technologies can also be applied, because we're talking COVID-19, we forget about other things, you know, about diabetes and other things. So those technologies can also be used, you know, to test other diseases, the existence of other diseases. So you democratize public health by making it easily available, and more portable equipment are also available, you know, to help people stay healthy or ward off, you know. So those are two areas that I think are probably the most evident ones in respect of new investment that you should make. I mean, I think in terms of infrastructure, there's a great need. I mean, 5G infrastructure, this is so politicized, right? So very politicized. But, you know, like ASEAN region needs between 11 to 18 billion US dollars of 5G investment. And therefore, you know, whether the Ericssons or Nokias are going to come in and give competition to Huawei or not, depends on whether you think it makes it worth your while to come here. And it would be worth your while.
It's all interlinked, you know, and it's a very nice and complex situation, and one doesn't go without the other. So very good. You mentioned another sector which is also seeing big changes. This is education, you know, online learning. I know you have been giving lectures at the London School of Economics. I actually don't know as you still do that. So I think there is a huge need for exchange of programs and education between the universities. And, sadly, we say it's all online now, and students are not able to travel. So that's going to be a big catch-up project and process.
Yeah, I mean, online has its limits, of course. You know, like you and I, you know, we would rather sit down over a drink or have some dinner and talk about these matters, like talking right now. Even ASEAN Business Advisory Council, I was talking to my counterpart in the Philippines just a few days ago, and we decided it would be a good idea to have a Christmas party online. So we're trying to fix a Christmas party. Everyone has his isolated drinks, but at least you're talking. At least you're talking. Well, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing.
Agree. It's second best, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Some things are second best, but some things are better online. And
on the other hand, you have to see what would be the alternative. If we are in this situation without all this technology, without all this technology and the tools we have available. So all in all, the world is still moving. The companies are producing. People are able to buy the deliveries. Technology there is a huge help.
Essentially, you want goods to move, right? And therefore, logistics have got to be improved. Right. And investment in logistics. Secondly, you want people to move. Therefore, we want to not revive, and because you want to revive, but you want to be on an airline again, to take holidays, to go on business trips, right? And therefore, you need all the healthcare protection to do such a trip. Vaccine, maybe, one, you don't know whether all going to be effective. So you want people and goods to move. You want services to be offered. If they cannot be offered directly, personally, physically, they have to be offered online. And then between online and physical, you have to decide which is more efficient. Now, the retail industry is dying everywhere. The high street shops are closing. In Britain, in Germany, here, in Malaysia, but is the online experience better? Are you getting your even if it's a Selfridges sort of jacket or whatever? Is it a better experience? Some people will say no, some people will say yes, but I think certain things needed online. Especially food, medical supplies. Yeah. And Lazada in Malaysia provided the platform, the e-commerce platform, to allow, people to sell their products, move their products better, because they could not move it, with trucks and, roads and congestion, with the congested activity.
Well, I definitely think we can agree that we are living in disruptive times, whether it's in terms of technologies, business solutions, services, products. And I think that was a very enlightening and useful discussion we have had. I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your
Thank you. And, very nice to see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stay online.
Right, bye-bye.
I will stop the recording of our interview. Maybe we can have a little chat later on. Just stay on the line, please. Yeah?
Okay.